Hi, I am Ryan, and you're watching my channel. Thank you for stopping by. I hope that you click like and subscribe. Anyways, today I want to talk about war. Now, I am not an expert. I'm not a historian, not a journalist. I have no special qualifications other than I read a lot and I think a lot, and maybe like you, just have a passing interest into the subject because it's very present with us today. Anyways, I've been reading Tolstoy's War and Peace, and in this beautiful, very thick novel, Tolstoy waxes eloquent on some of the causes of the wars that were taking place at that time. The subject of the novel, the Napoleonic Wars between the Russian Empire and the French Republic. And he makes some very beautiful statements about the causes of the war that was enveloping his country at that time. And he says, who is to blame? Is it Napoleon? Is it Emperor Alexander of the Russian Empire? Well, some people will say it's Napoleon. It was his ambition. It was this. It was that on his side. Some people will say it was Emperor Alexander. The fact that he got so offended at this, that he didn't do that. He goes in and he talks about, no, it's the Duke of Oldenburg. It's because he got his lands taken away and he had a grievance. Then he says, but other people will say it was the soldiers' fault because the soldiers signed up for the war. There would be no war if the soldiers didn't sign up. And the soldiers wanted the war because it was their job and they were looking forward to glory. And sure enough, throughout the novel, I mean, the soldiers are really quite happy. Not all of them, but a lot of them are very happy to go to war. It's thrilling for them. Of course, they see the horrors of it when they finally get into the trenches and see the battles and see all the wounded and when things don't go well. But they're excited to go to war because it's an opportunity for them to distinguish themselves. And then it's the generals. They want to do things. And then the businessmen blame it on the economics. And all of these various factors that go into how this war comes about. And you can see it from all of these different angles. And Tolstoy talks about how historians in the future look back at the wars of the past and they use all their research and they come up with all of these analyses and these nice, neat explanations, but it's never really quite that. It is a confluence of innumerable factors, and it almost becomes like fate. And he says that the higher up you are in the hierarchy of the decision-making that goes into the war, the less you have free will. So every man has free will. A soldier has free will. Does he sign up for the military? Or does he not sign up for the military? Does he pick up his rifle? Does he not pick up the rifle? But once you make that decision, then you are caught sort of in the machinery of what is taking place, of all of these forces that are colliding into these battles and these conflicts. But the higher up you go, when you're the king or you're the emperor or you're a general, you have less free will because you are almost being orchestrated by all of these forces. You must perform your role. And so it almost seems that Napoleon and Emperor Alexander have less free will in this massive war that is taking place. This is the War of 1812 that I'm speaking of. This is Book 9, Chapter 1 in Tolstoy's War and Peace. If you're curious, read it. It's very eloquent, very philosophic, and very beautiful. And it's a fascinating thing to read, and I'm not even doing it justice, but he gives an analogy. He says, when an apple falls from the tree, what is the cause of the apple falling from the tree? Is it the weight of the apple? Is it the cellular decay in the stem that causes it to snap from the branch and fall down? Is it the child below the apple tree praying to God for an apple to fall because he's hungry? And Tolstoy says, they're all right. Nothing is the cause. All of this is coincidence. of conditions in which all vital organic and elemental events occur. The botanist looks at it one way and says, of course, it's the cellular decay of the stem that causes the apple to snap from the branch. But the child looks at it from another angle. And who's to say who's right or wrong? I'm probably not really doing this justice, but I thought it was a fascinating look, because a lot of times we want to point our finger at one person to blame for the terrible tragedies that occur. Whatever it is, if it's a pandemic, then we're going to point our finger at one person or not who didn't do the right thing at the right time. If it's a war, we'll point our fingers at one or two people. And not to say that people aren't culpable and people aren't guilty in various orders and magnitude, but I think Tolstoy gives a very interesting perspective that there are all of these, what does he say, elemental and organic events and all of these vital forces that are sort of coalescing. I actually haven't finished the novel, so I'll probably bring up another video to wrap up my thoughts on war, because I've been thinking about it a lot with what's happening in Ukraine, between Ukraine, Russia, and all of the other forces that are coming into it. Because I guess I started to think about it, perhaps like you're watching the war in Europe and you're trying to think, what's going on? And if you hear one side of the message, the one narrative, it is Putin's a madman. He's got these crazy ambitions to revive the Russian Empire. These are the books that he subscribes to. It's all Putin's fault. And then if you look at the other narrative, it's Ukraine's a really corrupt country. There's all sorts of turmoil and perhaps, I don't want to get into the conspiracy theories, but about biolabs and Nazis, and I think there is some things about that are true, but I haven't really looked into it, so I'm not going to talk about that. But on that other side of the narrative, they talk about NATO expansion and U.S. foreign intervention into sort of the revolution that took place in Ukraine not too long ago. So sort of almost like a proxy war being taken place between the great powers. So U.S. intervention and NATO have sort of pushed Putin into the war. And then the other side, Putin's a madman. He shouldn't invade this sovereign country. He's terrible. And you look at all the terrible things that are happening in the war, and so then you get caught up in the emotions. And of course you want someone to blame because, goodness gracious, children are dying. And war is awful. War is despicable. And I think it's important to think about what causes war. And so I guess I wanted to talk about Tolstoy's idea of all of these sort of unconscious forces and these sort of factors of fate that can somewhat push us towards it. Just as it is perhaps the king or the general's fault, it is also the soldier's fault. It might also be the merchant's fault. It might also be the diplomat's fault. If the diplomats weren't able to hash it out, then the war wouldn't have taken place. Like I said, I'm not an expert. Not at all. Actually, I know very little about war. I've never been to war. But someone like you who perhaps thinks about it and tries to wrap his head around the things that are going on and trying not to get caught up in the narratives on either side. Because sometimes it's easy to sort of succumb to a narrative and agree with it just because then you have a nice settled answer. But war is very messy, just like life is very messy. And when I get in a fight with my wife and she blames me and I blame her, and then we never really get down to the underlying issues of why we're fighting. We're just sort of pointing our fingers at the other person, and she's got good reasons, I've got good reasons. But sometimes we got in a fight because of a lot of other factors that were going on that perhaps we should take a look at before we wrap the book and just point our finger at our enemy. Anyways, that's all I wanted to share. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know down below. My name's Ryan. Bye.